أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let us begin with this short supplication, which in essence is a reaffirming of our pledge of allegiance, our vow of obedience, and our commitment once again to serve the cause of our master, the Imam of our time, inshaAllah. اللهم بلغ مولاي صاحب الزمان مولاي صاحب الزمان صلوات الله عليه عن جميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها وبرها وبحرها وسهلها وجبلها حيهم وميتهم، وعن والدي وولدي وعني من الصلوات والتحيات زنة عرش الله ومداد كلماته ومنتهى رضاه وعدد ما أحصاه كتابه وأحاط به علمه. اللهم إني أجدد له في هذا اليوم وفي كل يوم عهدا وعقدا وبيعة في عنقي. اللهم كما شرفتني بهذا التشريف وفضلتني بهذه الفضيلة وخصصتني بهذه النعمة، فصل على مولاي وسيدي صاحب الزمان، واجعلني من أنصاره وأشياعه والذابين عنه، واجعلني من المستشهدين بين يديه طائعا غير مكره في الصف الذي نعدت أهله في كتابك، فقلت صفا كأنهم بنيان مرصوص على طاعتك وطاعة رسولك وآله عليهم السلام. اللهم هذه بيعة له في عنقي إلى يوم القيامة. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Once again, my dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another session. I believe this is session 205 of Theology class. So we're going to go straight to our slides and lecture notes so that we could pick up where we left off last time, inshallah. I hope everything's okay. You can see me all right. You can hear me. There are no problems, inshallah. Great, alhamdulillah. Thank you for the confirmation. Okay, so I trust that okay, there might be a bit of an issue with the video for just a second. If you could just bear with me as I try to address this. All right, never mind. So let me take you to the slides. All right, now you should be able to see this. Here we go. So we said in the previous session and many more sessions prior to that, there's been this consistent theme, which some of you perhaps are wondering at this point, why the insistence on this point? Why do we care so much about emphasizing and reiterating this central concept over and over again? And as I said, things become clearer as we move along the class material, inshallah. But the point was that inside each of us, there is an innate familiarity with God. This gnosis or connection or knowledge or understanding, or call it what you will, that we are created and that God created us. That there is a supernatural being, an all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscient creator that brought us all into this world and brought the whole world into existence, right? And that understanding rests deep inside our minds, our souls. It is something that we are familiar with. How? We don't quite know. How is it that we know this thing, despite the fact that we don't physically access it? We don't know. We just know that we know, right? And that is as visceral as you could get. So this is the reason why prophets and messengers don't really need to prove God's existence to any of us, right? They simply provide the environment so that we are reminded of this unmistakable, palpable, and tangible reality. Now, what this means is that insofar as proving God's existence, scriptures and prophets only act as reminders, right? A point that we've been making over and over again. In fact, we said, no proof is required. You don't even need to provide any kind of evidence to prove God's existence. The reason for that is very simple, once again, because you only need proof for things that you do not already know. If you already know something, then providing evidence would be counterproductive and counterintuitive. What you need to do instead is provide a reminder. Let's say, for example, someone wakes up and says, the sun doesn't exist. Now, he or she knows that the sun exists. Why? Because they've seen it. Because they've been out there, right? They can feel it. They can feel its effects. They can feel its warmth. And they already know that. But for whatever reason, because they went through a coma perhaps, a shocking trauma, or some kind of an out-of-body experience, or whatever the case may be, they are now convinced that the sun does not exist. Okay? When that happens, you don't sit down and try to philosophically or scientifically or mathematically prove to them that the sun exists. Instead, all you do, the most powerful evidence you can provide to put their minds at rest, is to simply remove the curtain and have them stare out their window. The second they see what's out there, the second their eyes are able to capture the rays of the sun, you don't need to speak to them, you don't need to provide any evidence, as I said. That is all you need to do. They will once again rediscover what they already knew to be true, which is that the sun is out there. It's always been there, right? It's been there for 18 billion years, in fact. It's been there before we came here, and it's going to be here long after we leave. So that's what the prophets and the imams do. They simply remind you of what you already know. That knowledge which you have had since the world of the spirits, since the world of the shadows, since those previous stages that we have all been through prior to coming into this world. Now, this is very, very critical and important because, listen carefully, you have those, okay, let me keep the slides because I want to show you this hadith, and then we'll go to the main camera so I can address you directly. You have people out there who will try and undermine the value of the evidence, and I say evidence, I use the word loosely, excuse me, but the proof, the hujjah, right? That's what the Quran refers to. That's what the hadiths refer to. Hujjah means proof that is incontrovertible, that is indisputable, right? When, let's say for example, someone is being tried for robbery or theft or murder or something. And of course you can have the prosecution and the defense lawyers debate all the various arguments and cross-examine the witnesses, and they could do all sorts of things to kind of just engage in this back and forth discussion as to whether or not this person is in fact guilty of the crime. But then somebody shows up out of the blue and says that, look, I have the hujjah, I have the incontrovertible, indisputable proof that this person is in fact the guilty party, in the form of a very clear video recording, a CCTV recording of the crime being committed in broad daylight with the person's characteristics and facial features clearly visible for everyone to see, right? That's hujjah. It's not just a piece of evidence, it is indisputable proof. So the verses of the Quran, the traditions of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt are hujjah. Why? Because they remind you, because they act like the person removing the curtain so you could see the reality right there in front of you. You yourself will come to discover what you have already known but refuse to acknowledge for whatever reason, whether it be arrogance, hubris, ignorance, or whatever the reason happens to be. You denied it, now you know it to be true. Which is why the commander of the faithful, alayhi salatu wassalam, or I believe it was Fatima al-Zahra, in fact, who in her sermon, I believe it was the second Fadakiyya sermon, she says that Ali ibn Abi Talib, the commander of the faithful, was appointed by the Prophet to be the leader of the Ummah after the passing of the Holy Messenger. But if people don't want that to happen, if they choose to reject this great blessing of God, this great unifier, this great leader, this great educator, the person who said, "Allamani Rasulullah alf babin min al-ilm, yuftahu li min kulli babin alf babin min al-ilm," the Holy Prophet taught me 1,000 disciplines and areas of knowledge, and from each one 1,000 other windows open, 1,000 other sciences open up before me. The one who has imparted the Prophet's knowledge in its entirety. If you don't want him, then the mistress of the women of the world cites a verse in the Quran, أَنُلْزِمُكُمُوهَا وَأَنْتُمْ لَهَا كَارِهُونَ. Are we going to force it upon you when you don't want it? Right? Anyway, so the point here is that if you decide to deny it for whatever reason, once you've been shown the truth by simply letting you and reminding you to look out the window and see for yourself, well, that decision then is your prerogative. So you have people, again, listen very carefully to this, who have tried to undermine the value of these proofs. And they'll say things like this hadith. I'll read it and then I'll discuss the hadith. So this has been mentioned by Allam al-Majlisi, Ridwanullah ta'ala alayhi al-Majlisi, al-Thani, in his magnum opus, Bihar al-Anwar. He quotes it from سئل أمير المؤمنين عليه السلام, I believe it's from Ihtijaj, if I'm not mistaken. The Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib was asked عن إثبات الصانع, to prove the designer, meaning the creator rather, to prove the creator, prove God. فقال, the Imam responded, listen carefully, البعرة تدل على البعير والروثة تدل على الحمير وآثار القدم تدل على المسير فهيكل علوي بهذه اللطافة ومركز سفلي بهذه الكثافة كيف لا يدلان على اللطيف الخبير. What's interesting, by the way, on a side note, this same hadith attributed to the commander of the faithful, which is incredibly insightful, absolutely rhetorically beautiful, and even the words rhyme while not compromising on the message. This has been attributed to Al-A'rabi. So if you look up this hadith in Google, for example, or in search engines that look through hadith traditions and the hadith corpus, you'll find this hadith attributed to Al-A'rabi, meaning the Bedouin. The Bedouin was asked and he said such and such. Although here we see it attributed to the commander of the faithful. Of course, many traditions of the Imam have been attributed to random people. Sometimes, perhaps most of the times, it is either to an anonymous person like a Bedouin, some Bedouin happened to have such knowledge, or it could be Al-Hasan al-Basri, this imposter, or it's perhaps one of the Khulafa, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, what have you. But that is part of the oppression that Amir al-Mu'mineen was subjected to. Anyway, so what does the Imam actually say here? He's asked to provide evidence that God exists. What does he do? He acts as a reminder. Again, he wants to use simple observations. Asking the person who denies the sun to look out the window is a very simple observation. The Imam says, Al-ba'ratu tadullu ala al-ba'ir. Al-ba'ra means the dung, right? The droppings of a camel show or point to the existence of a camel. Again, you don't need to be a Bedouin to understand this. You don't need to be a farmer to understand this. Anybody understands, if you've ever seen an animal in your life, if you've been living under a rock, that's a whole other discussion. But if you've seen an animal, or cattle mostly, then you know that if you go around and you see on a portion of the farm or the zoo, you see droppings there, you know for a fact that an animal was here. Even a 4-year-old child understands this. And a 70-year-old university professor in astrophysics, by making this simple observation, acquires the same knowledge. So, this isn't a matter of the argument being too simplistic. Instead, it's a simple argument that allows you to make the most profound, to draw the most profound conclusions from it. It is simple in the sense that it doesn't require much of an effort, but it is incredibly insightful in what it allows you to absorb as a result, right? So the Imam says, you see a camel's dung on the sand, you know that a camel has passed through here. وَالرَّوْثَةُ تَدُلُّ عَلَى الْحَمِيرِ. If you see manure, then you know that there was a donkey that walked past here. وَآثَارُ الْقَدَمِ تَدُلُّ عَلَى الْمَسِيرِ. If you see footprints, what does that tell you? If you've ever been in the Boy Scouts, if you've ever gone camping, if you've ever watched perhaps a documentary, if you've ever observed how people in the jungle or in the desert find their way, again, if you have not been living under a rock, you would know that if there was any footprint on the ground, in the mud, on the sand, on the beach, then a person must have passed through that area. You have not observed that person. You don't know what that person looks like. You have no idea whether that person is beautiful or ugly or tall or short or rich or poor or healthy or sick or any of those things. But you know for a fact, without a speck of doubt, incontrovertibly, unmistakably, that a person walked past that area. Is that not enough proof that a person was there? It's more than enough. وآثار القدم تدل على المسير فهيكل علوي بهذه اللطافة. Then the Imam starts to point or direct our attention to the cosmos, to the world, to the universe around us. He says this massive structure that stands above us with such intricacy, Allahu Akbar, بهذه اللطافة, incredibly intricate, incredibly precise, The measurements, the calculations, the movements of the celestial objects is so incredibly mind-bendingly precise that astronomers can actually sit down using our primitive equipment, our very basic measurement tools, and tell you and calculate to the most minute degree where a celestial object is going to be in 1,000 years' time because of those precision movements that those celestial objects are bound to. The Imam says this incredible, large, unfathomably big and monumental structure that at the very same time is so precise. وَمَرْكَزٌ سُفْلِيٌّ بِهَذِهِ الْكَثَافَةِ, and this central location that houses all of us, this earth on which we stand. كَيْفَ لَا يَدُلَّانِ عَلَى اللَّطِيفِ الْخَبِيرِ. How could these not point us to the one who creates with precision and the one who has knowledge of all things? To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, I said earlier that some people will try to undermine or take away or diminish the value of these arguments. How? They'll tell you things like, these arguments are too simplistic. That yeah, if you happen to be a farmer living in the 4th century, this might have been a good argument for you. But let me ask you this. I just mentioned these examples. Did you find them to be too simplistic or naive? When I tell you that if someone denies the existence of the sun, all you have to do is point them to the window and say, hey, here's the blinds cleared from your path, now look outside. Is that too simplistic? Is that too naive? Is that argument no longer valid because now we have phones and we have gadgets and we have electronic styluses and we have mice and we have mechanical keyboards? Seriously? You're going to make that argument? That somehow, because we've now developed technologically and we've got cameras and we can speak from across the globe, that these visceral, deeply intellectual statements and proofs and arguments that speak directly to our souls, you're going to tell me that they're no longer valid? The reason they will try to undermine these arguments and say that they are defunct, that they're no longer relevant, that they cannot address the needs of the day is because they want to cast all of these things aside. They want to cast aside the Holy Quran, the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt, the Imam of the time himself, and put themselves in his place. They want to say that now we have greater intellectual capacity to come up with philosophical arguments that are sophisticated and complicated that the Prophet and the Imams never could produce. In other words, they're trying to undermine the prophetic hadith, إِنِّي تَارِكٌ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَعِتْرَةِ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ. I'm leaving behind two things: the Holy Quran, my family. There is no third object there. Nothing. There is no source of knowledge there other than those two. Now, this is very important. And part of the reason that this happens, this idea that the Quran and the Hadith, they're inadequate, that they're not relevant any longer, that yeah, maybe there was a time they had some use but not anymore. These kinds of calls are usually made by the most ignorant of people. Oh, they may have the intellectual, not the intellectual, but perhaps the academic accolades, right? But in reality, they are ignorant, which is why, brothers and sisters, we keep on emphasizing the importance of seeking knowledge, right? If you leave yourself to your own whims, this is where you end up. Where the Quran is no longer valuable to you because somehow we have now created semiconductors, right? The Quran is no longer of use or of any relevance to you. Look at what Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam says, and this is in the blessed book of Al-Kafi. In the chapter that you will remember perhaps from the previous semester, Kitab al-Ilm, Kitab al-Aqli wal-Jahl, wa Kitab Fadl al-Ilm, right? The chapter that deals with the importance and significance of knowledge. The Imam says there, عن أبي عبد الله عليه السلام قال, I'm skipping through the chain because it's irrelevant. قال يغدو الناس على ثلاثة أصناف عالم ومتعلم وغثاء. The Imam says people are of three types, three categories. Number one, they are alim, meaning they possess knowledge. Now, when you, just parenthetically I'll mention this, by virtue of the fact that the first category is alim and the second category is muta'allim, which denotes a continuity, meaning someone who is actively seeking knowledge, because we have both of these categories juxtaposed against each other, we can surmise that alim means the prophets and imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. In other words, alim means someone who did not acquire his knowledge from other people. They acquired their knowledge from God. Muta'allim is everybody else, those who seek knowledge, right? So the highest ranking scholar all the way down to the freshman student, they all fall under the category of muta'allim. The Imam says people are of three kinds. Number one, they are scholars. Number two, they are seekers of knowledge from those scholars, right? That's what it means. If you're a seeker of knowledge, you take it from who? From people who already possess it. Number three, وَغُثَاءٌ. Now what is غُثَاء? غُثَاء literally translates as scum. And scum is layers of dirt or froth. You'll see this sometimes on the banks of rivers. You'll see it on the ocean sometimes. But mostly you will see it in, if you look up Google pictures of the flood water after it starts to dissipate and go down, right? What happens is you get this layer on top that's filled with garbage. It's filled with scum. It's filled with froth. And it usually sits at the surface of the water. Now, why does the Imam liken the third category? We said learned ones, those who seek knowledge from the learned ones, and number three, scum. Why refer to those as scum? Allamatul Majlisi, Ridwanullah Ta'ala alayh, in his beautiful work known as Mir'atul Uqul, which is a commentary on Usul al-Kafi. In other words, I believe it's a 25 volume, if I'm not mistaken, 25 volume commentary on only 2 volumes of Al-Kafi al-Sharif, which represent Al-Usul. Salamullah al-Husayn. In that book, when he gets to this hadith, he says that there are multiple reasons or possible explanations as to why the Imam used the word scum in reference to the third category. He mentions a number of them. I'll only mention 2. He says, number 1, because scum has 0 value. If you're not knowledgeable yourself, meaning you're a prophet, you're an Imam, and you're not someone who's actively seeking knowledge from them, then what that leaves you, God forbid, obviously I'm not speaking about you, but it leaves those who fall into this category as absolute scum because they have 0 value, just like the froth on the surface of flood water. It is worthless, it is repulsive, and it is universally detested. Those who fit this category are equally worthless and detested. That's explanation number 1. Explanation number 2, he says, scum travels where the water takes it. Subhanallah. Scum doesn't direct the water. Water directs where the scum goes. It has, in other words, no agency of its own. As Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says in that famous hadith to Kumayl ibn Ziyad, he calls them أتباع كل ناعق يميلون مع كل ريح. Those who are ignorant, those who are not seeking knowledge, they follow anybody who calls on to them. They'll follow the media, they'll follow politicians, they'll follow imposters, they'll follow false prophets, they'll follow anybody who calls them, anybody who has a cause, they will follow along. يميلون مع كل ريح. They will they'll be swayed with the wind wherever it happens to take them, which is why such people, because of their lack of knowledge, you will see that they are inconsistent, they are contradictory, they keep contradicting themselves, they keep shifting with the tide, right? Whatever happens to be trending, whatever happens to be in fashion, whatever happens to be the tide of the day, they'll follow along. Everybody happens to be doing such and such, so we'll all do the same thing. Everybody wears a certain kind of clothes, they'll wear the same thing. Everybody's now getting tattoos, let's all get tattoos. They'll just follow along like froth and like scum. They will go wherever their interests lie, which usually aligns with popular beliefs and practices. Now, the learned and the seeker, on the other hand, they both have a clear vision and a roadmap. They have a plan as to where they must go and what they must do, irrespective of the world around them and what they do. As we recited in Hadith Unwan al-Basri, if you remember, in the previous semester in the class Etiquettes of Learning, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam tells Unwan al-Basri, he says, Allah yudabbir al-abdu li nafsihi tadbira. One of the 3 manifestations of being a true slave of God and subservient and obedient of Him is that you don't make up your own plans. You follow what the Master tells you to do. Haven't you ever heard people say, oh, but she's still young. You know, let her have her fun. What that effectively means is she has her own plans. She has her own, her life mapped out by her, and she wants to do whatever she wants to do. She wants to have a little fun while she's young, right? She's in her sweet 16, or she only had her 17th or 18th birthday, or 21st or 25th or whatever. And so sometimes you'll have the adults reaffirming this false notion, unfortunately. Excuse me. Whereas we know that as a scholar or as a seeker of knowledge, you don't make up your own plans. You have a clear vision based on the knowledge that you've acquired, right? Listen to this next hadith. Again, in Al-Kafi, I believe it's right. It's the hadith right next to it, right after it. If one of the brothers or sisters can actually look up the actual hadith and find the proper translation, that'd be great. عن أبي حمزة الثمالي, this time this companion of Imam الصادق عليه السلام, قال لي أبو عبد الله صلوات الله عليه أغد عالما أو متعلما أو أحب أهل العلم. There are some incredible nuances in this hadith which I want to draw your attention to. The Imam says, أغد عالما أو متعلما أو أحب أهل العلم ولا تكن رابعا فتهلك ببغضهم. What this means is this. The first word in this hadith is أغد. What does أغد mean? أغد is from the word غدو. And غدو is mentioned in the Quran multiple times, right? One of those is in this verse in Surah Al-A'raf, chapter 7, verse 205. I believe the one before the last. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرْ رَبَّكَ فِي نَفْسِكَ تَضَرُّعًا وَخِيفَةً وَدُونَ الْجَهْرِ مِنَ الْقَوْلِ بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ
وَلَا تَكُمْ مِنَ الْغَافِلِينَ. Remember your Lord inwardly with humility and trepidation, reciting His book softly, morning and evening, and be not among the negligent ones. So what does ghudu mean? Ghudu means, in fact, the time between dawn and sunrise, early morning. So let's go back to the hadith. The Imam says, Ughdu, he's commanding Abu Hamza that he should wake up very early in the morning and be what? عالما أو متعلما أو أحب أهل العلم. Either be an erudite, a knowledgeable person, a scholar, meaning you either have to be a prophet or an imam, right? It's almost like saying H2O exists in 3 different states. Either it's liquid or it's gas or it's solid, right? In this case, the imam is explaining the reality of the world. He says either you must be a prophet or an imam, which of course you're not, or muta'alliman, be a seeker of knowledge. Now, the fact that the imam started the hadith by saying ughdu perhaps doesn't necessarily mean that every time you wake up early in the morning at dawn, you should be a seeker of knowledge. Rather, what this means is something, I guess, perhaps a lot more relevant and less sort of literal than that. Because usually, the first thing people do when they wake up in the morning, and not the first thing as in chronological order, but when people wake up in the morning, what do? They go to work or they go to study, right? Or they do whatever it is that they do, meaning that they will carry out their main job, their occupation, their work. That's what they do, right? What the Imam is saying is that your job has to be either one who is already knowledgeable or you are a seeker of knowledge. Now at this point you might be saying, but I'm a homemaker. How could I do that? Or I'm a professional, or I'm a student, or I have one of a plethora of occupations out there. How could I also do this for a living, seek knowledge for a living? And the answer lies in the next statement. The Imam says, either be a seeker of knowledge, which by the way, even if you're a homemaker, that's what you're doing. By attending these classes, by listening to these lectures, by participating, by transcribing, by answering questions, by engaging with your fellow students and so forth, by sitting for exams, that's what you're doing. And irrespective of your actual occupation, we have amongst us people from all walks of life. SubhanAllah, you may not know each other for the most part, but as administrators and as instructors and teachers in these classes, we are always amazed by the caliber of people that we get. The different occupations, the different backgrounds, the different walks of life that they come from. And despite all of those differentiating parameters, how they're all together, how they've all come to the one place to serve one specific cause, and that is to satisfy the Imam of their time. By learning the knowledge of the Ahlul Bayt, by learning about their religion, about their faith, and seeking nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're always amazed by this. So don't ever be put down by the fact that you happen to be a homemaker, or you happen to be a laborer, or you happen to be God knows what. You are here, aren't you? It means Allah has blessed you to be among this group, which is to be muta'alliman. Now, the Imam then says, if you cannot even be a muta'allim, if for some reason you happen to be in these extreme circumstances where you cannot seek knowledge, right? Then there is one final option. What is it? The Imam says, أو أحب أهل العلم. At the very least, the last thing, the last choice that you have here is to love people of knowledge. Now, when you love people of knowledge, it's going to manifest itself in your life, isn't it? You're going to be someone who sponsors people who go and seek knowledge. You may help them financially to look after their immediate needs so that they could do this. SubhanAllah, I remember there was a good friend of mine who passed away. Someone who I truly admire. Rahmatullah ta'ala alayh. And he once said something to us when he was quite well off. And he said that, I'd like to ask you, as in my family, to establish an institution, and I will take care of all the expenses, he said. He said, I want you to establish an institution that trains future students in the traditional Islamic studies, as well as the ancillary instrumental sciences that they may need to be just like you. And then he said something really interesting. He said, the reason I want to sponsor a project like this is because I could go and build a mosque here, establish a Husseiniya there, create an orphanage in this part of the world, do a project here, do a project there. He goes, I could perhaps do some of those things, not all of them, but some of them, right? Ultimately, my resources are limited. My time is very much limited. And so at the very end of my life, I'll probably have done maybe 2 or 3 of those things. He said, but instead, I want to do the smart thing, which is to create scholars who will then go on to build hundreds of institutions. They will then go on to guide thousands of people. And they will do the work that I could never do myself. But what I am doing is I am planting the seed, and I am helping fund this institution that creates an environment that gives rise to such individuals who will then go on to do things I could never dream of doing. That's very smart, incredibly so, by this wonderful friend, rahmatullah alayh. Now, I will mention that before he was able to actually do that, he passed away. Death came too suddenly to him, as it does to all of us. Which is why if you ever find yourself in a position to do the right thing, don't hesitate, don't procrastinate, don't delay, just do it. Because our time here is limited. وَالْمَوْتُ يَأْتِي بَغْتَةً, as Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is quoted to have said, وَالْقَبْرُ صُنْدُوقُ الْعَمَلِ. Death comes abruptly and without any prior warning most of the time. Anyway, going back to the hadith, the Imam says that if you can't be a seeker of knowledge, at least love people of knowledge. You'll invite them to perhaps come and give lectures. You will honor them when they come visit you. You will go and visit them. You will do what you can to ensure that your love and your respect to people of knowledge is manifested clearly. The Imam so provides 3 different options here. Then he concludes with this. He says, وَلَا تَكُنْ رَابِعًا فَتَهْلَكَ بِبُغْضِهِمْ. And don't be anything other than these 3. The Imam says, don't be the 4th, because you will perish with hatred of the scholars, hatred of the seekers of knowledge. And subhanAllah, there are people out there. You would think that this is outrageous for someone to actually hate the ulama, to despise the ulama, right? But there are people out there, and unfortunately some of them hold positions of prominence, positions of power within communities and elsewhere. They actually hate the scholars. They feel envious towards the scholars. They feel this sense of resentment towards the scholars, which makes absolutely no sense to me, other than the fact that it's pure envy. The Imam says, فَتَهْلَكُوا بِبُغْضِهِمْ. You will perish. You will destroy no one but yourself and whoever happens to follow you along the way as well, right? Anyway, I think I will conclude with this. I did have another hadith which I wanted to share with you, but I think we'll leave it for the next session, inshallah, because that does require a little bit more discussion, as do all of the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt. There's just so much to gain from them. So yes, I will now, let's see, try and answer some of the questions that you might have. Okay, and I'll do that as quickly as I can. So, Brother Carl, Assalamu alaikum, dear brother. He says, I hope you are well, inshallah. I hope you're well. I hope your son is well. He says, I sound like I have a cold. Please take care. You're always in my du'as. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Yes, I think it's more than a cold, but hopefully nothing serious, inshallah. Can we upload the video from last week? I believe the videos from last week's sessions have been uploaded. Just check the playlist, which we've posted on the Telegram channel. So there was just one issue with one particular class of Sayyid Hussein Modarresi, eschatology, which we're trying to resolve. For some reason, we haven't been able to find that file, but anyway, bear with us. We'll try and fix this, inshallah. And as I said before, we are having some technical issues. So with your prayers, inshallah, we'll be able to fix them. Salamu alaikum. Someone says, if you can please help me understand the difference between shaitan whispers and our nafs and desires to do sin. Which one occurs first? They're not necessarily linked, or there isn't necessarily a causal link between them. In other words, what the shaitan does is that he beautifies the acts of transgression and sin, right? Shaitan is the one that provides the philosophical and the logical rationalizations. Shaitan is the one you have a conversation with in your head. He's the one that says, but who says this is haram? But it's okay. It's just the first time. You'll always stop right after, right? He's the one who provides all those justifications, all those rationalizations, all of those nudges to do the wrong thing. The nafs is what desires the acts of sin themselves, right? It's the nafs that pulls you to the sin, but it's the shaitan that tries to rationalize that committing that sin is okay. I hope that makes sense. Brother Taqi Haidar says, can we say that the atheists of today differ from the times of the prophets and imams in the sense that their fitrah is more clouded due to the artificial sense of science and disproving God through it, so they need arguments of God's existence? No. I mean, if anything, let's say, for example, their fitrah is it has been, completely tampered with, right? First of all, I don't know if you can make the case that the atheists of today have a more clouded judgment and more obscure sense of fitrah than the Bedouin Arabs who used to literally bury their daughters alive, right? I'm not sure you can make that argument. I'm not saying that the atheists of today are in any way better or less worse than those Arabs. I'm just saying that ultimately it's a matter of the fitrah being covered up by a thick layer of scum and froth and desires and temptations and sophisticated philosophical arguments that will only obscure the truth. And so at the end of it all, no matter how many layers you have on your eyes or on your face, no matter how many blinders you're wearing, no matter what time you're in, ultimately the best thing you can do to a denier is to show them the truth, right? Look out the window. So to say that the atheists of today require philosophical reasoning, I think is it's an argument that sounds like it's what we need, because again, we conflate technological advancement with atheists having more sophisticated tools with which they disprove God's existence, but there is no correlation between the two whatsoever. Yes, more people have pointed out that I sound a bit sick, and they're praying for my well-being, and I thank you so much for that from the bottom of my heart. Is it bad to use real philosophical reasoning if someone asks us this question? Is it bad? It can cause more confusion. It often does. And it definitely isn't the shortest way to guide them. So you would essentially put yourself in a difficult position of having to use philosophical reasoning to prove something which does not need proving. In a way, you're wasting your time. You're going around in circles, right? If there was any argument that was needed to prove God's existence, it would be there in the Quran or the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt. Let's just put it that way. Sister Anisa says, regarding the first explanation of the scum, does the scum mean all the people who are not actively seeking the Ahlul Bayt knowledge? That's literally what the Imam is saying, that if you're not seeking knowledge, in other words, if someone is in a constant state of ignorance and they're not even trying, they're not even attempting to eradicate that ignorance and to seek the truth and to be illuminated by the teachings of the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, by knowing their religion, by understanding the bigger existential questions in life and finding an answer to those conundrums, if they're not trying to make an attempt, I don't care how rich they are, I don't care how sophisticated a lifestyle they may have, I don't care how many yachts they own and how many horse barns they operate, I don't care about any of those things. They are scum, meaning they're worthless. And by scum, we're not trying to excuse me, we're not trying to insult them, we're just saying that they're worthless. Real worth comes from having knowledge that guides you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the creator of the universe, that aligns you to the purpose for which God created you, which is to worship Him, to get to know Him, right? If you don't have that knowledge, nor are you trying to acquire that knowledge, you're a waste of breath, you're a waste of life, you are scum, right? Again, I'm not advocating any kind of violence, but I'm saying that this kind of lifestyle is worthless, it is meaningless, it is pathetic. So, Carl once again says, I find myself these days not watching any TV or any movies which are full of transgression and misinformation. I either spend time re-watching these classes or Ahlul Bayt TV in prayer, etc. My outlook has changed completely, subhanAllah. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. May Allah bless you. Okay, I think we will wrap this up. So Sister Zina is asking, is there any Arabic pre-Hawza courses? Actually, we are working on that. So you'll hear from us very soon, inshallah. How do I get rid of laziness and wasting time when I could use this time to seek knowledge? I mean, if somebody says, how do I get rid of being lazy instead of losing weight because I happen to be obese and therefore my health is in jeopardy, the only thing you can tell them is, get off your backside, go to the gym or start exercising or do some work. Or I think ultimately it's about you recalibrating what matters to you the most, right? What is it that matters to you? Is it money? Is it meaningless and worthless things in this life? Or are you trying to pull yourself out of the level of an animal? As Amir al-Mu'mineen says, hammuha alafuha. The only thing a sheep cares about is chewing on grass. That's literally all a sheep does 24/7, other than the time it spends sleeping, right? Am I not better than a sheep? Am I not more worthy than just a mindless animal? If I am, then I should try and pull myself up just a little bit higher. And the only way I could do that is to use the faculties that I have, use the abilities, the skills, the resources that I've been blessed with to seek knowledge. And if I don't do that, then I might as well just be a sheep. All right, Sister Mardiya says, How about their intellectual capacity? Some people say that the atheists just weren't smart enough to understand more complex arguments back then. That is absolutely false. That's not true. Because again, and this is coming from someone who kind of does this for a living, I've looked at the arguments posed by atheists today, and I compare those to what the Disanis and the Ibn Abil Awjaz and others presented to the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, and there is almost nothing that the neo-atheists have come up with that is more sophisticated or more solid than what those people had, right? Atheism is about denying reality, right? This question, with respect, I'm not, judging you here, but the question itself that's posed by people, and I've heard it before, is basically like saying someone who is, let's say, someone who's racist today, if a racist in the 21st century acts in a manner that is resentful and hateful towards a person who is black or brown, well, the racist today is more sophisticated than the racist 2 centuries ago or 3 centuries ago. Therefore, when we address the racist today, it has to be by using philosophical arguments. Does anyone ever make that claim? Nobody ever said that. A racist is a racist. It doesn't matter what age they're in. It doesn't matter what socio-economic background they come from. It doesn't matter, how much money they have, how many degrees they possess. None of it matters. An atheist is one who denies the most obvious reality, right? So the only way to get them to turn around is to show them the reality exists. There are reminders all around them, all over the place, right? So that's what the Quran does. That's what the Prophet does. Okay, I think we will wrap it up with that. I do apologize. May Allah bless you all. Keep me in your du'as. I sure need it, as I will keep you in mind. جزاكم الله خير وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.